Now we're going to talk about middle childhood social emotional development. We're going to start by talking about Erikson. If you remember his stages correctly, it started with trust versus mistrust in infancy, autonomy versus shame and doubt in toddlers, and initiative versus guilt in preschoolers. So now we are in his next stage, industry versus inferiority. So Erikson was highly influenced by Freud, and Freud considered this part of development latency. He said this was the time where any intense inner drives that may have been present earlier are less evident now. So according to Freud and also to Erikson, at this stage in middle childhood, their attention is focused on school. So they both considered it only a lull before the storm of puberty. So Erikson's quote about this stage is, "I am what I learn." This is what he saw as a child's identity here. So what does it mean to become industrious? Children in this stage want to move beyond the pretend play of preschool and become useful, become industrious. So here's another quote from Erikson where he once strove to walk well or throw things now he wants to make things well. So children in this stage actually want to be useful. They want to do things that have real world implications. The other side of this stage is the inferiority. So this is the danger of this stage, the bad outcome. They could develop a sense of inferiority or inadequacy, and this could be caused by insufficient resolution of the previous stages. For example, not forming a trusting bond with mother can make a child not want to leave mother's side in order to attend school. And poor schooling can turn off the child's natural drive to become industrious. So we see sort of a culmination of the previous stages here, which could impact whether they become industrious or inferior. And also if a child enters school really wanting to learn, really autonomous, really able to take initiative, but the school is bad and doesn't encourage these things, then that could turn off the child's natural drive and they may not be able to become industrious. And instead they'll develop a sense of inferiority or inadequacy. Next, we're going to talk about social cognition. So what is it? Social cognition is the development of children's understanding of the relationship between themselves and others, just a knowledge of their social world. And a really important aspect of this is perspective taking. So there was a test of perspective taking by Robert Selman in 1980. So he posed a scenario and a question to children of various ages to come up with his theory. The scenario is this. Holly is an 8-year-old girl who likes to climb trees. She is the best tree climber in the neighborhood. One day, while climbing down from a tall tree, she falls off the bottom branch, but does not hurt herself. Her father sees her fall. He is upset and asks her to promise not to climb trees anymore. Holly promises. Later that day, Holly and her friends meet Sean. Sean's kitten is caught up in a tree and cannot get down. Something has to be done right away or the kitten may fall. Holly is the only one who climbs trees well enough to reach the kitten and get it down, but she remembers her promise to her father. What will Holly do and how will her father feel? So he posed this question to children of various ages and categorized their answers, and he came up with his levels of perspective taking. So in level 0, he saw this around 3 to 6 years old. They're very egocentric. They don't realize that other people have different perspectives than their own. So remember, they think that everyone feels the way they feel, thinks the way they think. So they might say something like, Holly will save the kitten because she likes kittens, and her dad will be happy because he likes kittens too. So you really still see an egocentric point of view. Level 1 develops around 5 to 9 years. And in this stage, they understand that people in different situations have different perspectives. They still assume that only one perspective is right. There's only one that's correct. They might say, father will be angry if he doesn't know why she climbed the tree, but he would understand once she tells him why. They understand that the father's perspective is different from Holly's, but once he has the information, he will assume the right perspective, which is Holly's. Level 2 is around 7 to 12 years. You'll notice some overlap in these ages, and it's just because children develop at different rates. So these are just those normal ranges that children typically develop these. So in level 2, they realize that people may think or feel differently because they have different values and ideas. So they realize that others are capable of understanding the child's perspective. And child is better at anticipating the reactions of other people. So they might say something like, Holly knows her father will understand why she climbed the tree and therefore will not punish her. They realize that Holly's father will understand Holly's perspective and won't punish her because her intentions were good. Level 3, around 10 to 15 years. Both child and another person can consider each other's points of view at the same time. So Holly's father will think that Holly shouldn't have climbed the tree, but now that he has heard her side of the story, he will feel she is doing what she thought was right. Holly realizes that her father will consider how she felt. So now we see their answers reflect the idea that Holly is taking on her father's perspective and her father is taking on Holly's perspective at the same time. And then level 4 is 12 and older. Child realizes that mutual perspective taking does not always lead to agreement. Just because people can take on each other's perspectives don't mean that they'll agree with each other. And they realize that the perspectives of the larger social group must also be considered. For instance, society expects children to obey their parents, so Holly should realize why her father might punish her. Even if her father understands her perspective, he still might punish her. He may not agree with her. So these nuances are really nitpicky, so don't worry too much about them. But as children advance, you should see how their perspective taking becomes more and more sophisticated. Next is representation of self. So self-concept in middle childhood. Remember, in early childhood, if you would ask a preschooler to describe themselves, they would focus really on concrete characteristics, how they look, what they do, what they like, what their activities are, things that you can see and observe. Well, in middle childhood, their self-concept now includes more abstract internal traits or personality characteristics. For example, they might say that they're nice, they're stubborn, they're smart, and their social relationships also now play a role. So they start to identify themselves with who they're friends with and how they are with their friends. So they're gaining the ability to compartmentalize their abilities. So they're able to separate abilities into multiple domains. So for instance, good at school becomes instead good at math or good at reading. And they can compartmentalize those and separate them and might say like they're good at art but not at writing. They're good at reading but not at math. So they're starting to separate abilities into more and more groups and evaluate themselves in those groups individually. They can also list multiple attributes when you ask them about themselves. So I have some examples here. When asked to answer the question, who am I? A 9-year-old will still focus on physical traits and facts such as eye color, their home address. They'll mention their likes and hobbies, but they are still tied to concrete thinking. An 11-year-old, just 2 years later, will emphasize competencies, what they're good at, like the 9-year-old did, but they'll seek to bolster their self-esteem by emphasizing what they're good at, despite not liking something else about themselves. So they'll talk more about what they're good at than what they're bad at. And they also show a greater concern for internal traits, psychological characteristics, and social relationships. So they might say, I'm truthful, I'm nice, I'm a good friend. Girls are more likely than boys to define themselves by their social group, however. So we really see an advancement in self-concept as we go through the middle childhood years. So self-esteem. This is the sense of value or worth that people attach to themselves. As self-concepts become more differentiated, children are more able to evaluate their self-worth. Authoritative parenting, remember that's a good one, contributes to a high self-esteem. And high self-esteem is also associated with secure attachment. It always comes back to attachment and parenting. So parts of self-esteem are social competence, just how good they are with their peers. So their social acceptance by their peers is equally important as their parents in this age group. So before it was all about the parents, now we start to see children value their peers and their parents equally. And this is going to shift the other way in adolescence, going to peers being more important than parents. Self-efficacy, that's just your ability of how well you can do something. That's your self-efficacy. And this is part of self-esteem. So if you have a high academic self-efficacy, that means you believe that you're good at school and you know how to learn and get good grades. So how they evaluate themselves is part of their self-esteem. And then just a sense of competency. It's important for children to have a sense of competency in one area to compensate for struggles in another. As early as 6 to 7 years old, children can differentiate competence in several different areas: physical ability, physical appearance, peer relationships, parent relationships, reading, mathematics, and general school performance. So they're able to evaluate themselves in those seven different areas. And all of these work together to form a child's self-esteem. Now, self-esteem tends to decline through middle childhood, and it reaches a low point at 12 or 13. So why are some of the reasons for that? Well, egocentric young children, preschoolers, have unrealistic self-confidence or self-concepts. They think they are spectacular. They think they're amazing. But as their egocentrism fades, they begin to compare themselves to their peers. This leads them to more critical self-appraisal, so they start to realize they're not good at something as a friend is. Girls tend to have more favorable self-concepts in reading and general academics, and boys in math, physical ability, and physical appearance. Why is this? Well, socialization and gender stereotypes play a huge role in this. Girls just expect that they'll be good at reading and academics. Boys expect they'll be better at physical ability and math. Okay, peer status. So there's several different statuses that children can have with their peers. The first is popular. This means that they're liked by many of their peers. Really liked by many of their peers. The second is rejected. This means disliked by many. So when their peers are interviewed, a lot of them will say they really dislike this person. Controversial. They're both liked and disliked intensely by classmates. So classmates either love them or hate them, and very little in between. So average. They are liked by some and disliked by some, but it's not the same intensity as controversial. They're just in the middle. Neglected children are ignored by their classmates. They're neither liked nor disliked. These are the ones where if you ask their classmates about it, they say, who? Who's that? So why does this matter? Children who are rejected by their peers, maybe it's because they're socially awkward, maybe it's because they're aggressive, but repeated peer rejection can lead to serious negative consequences. They might drop out of school, commit juvenile offenses, have psychopathology. Children and parents can be taught more effective ways to interact with each other, though, and help children get more acceptance by their peers. Okay. So think about the relationships between social hierarchies and bullying and school violence. Peer status is really important. And we're going to talk more about peer relationships in the next video.